Welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our third graders out there, though everyone is welcome to tune in. This lesson is the first in this week's series. My name is Miss Copeland, and I'm a third grade teacher at Venus Stewart Elementary in Gallatin, Tennessee. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. Every day I'm also writing a note to one of my students in my class who I'm missing. Today's note is for Hannah. Hannah, I miss seeing you each and every day in our class. You always have excellent ideas to contribute, and I love hearing your thoughtful responses. I hope you're doing well. Love, Miss Copeland. If you didn't see our previous lessons, you can find them on www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune in to today's lesson if you haven't seen any of our others before. Today, we will be learning about a classic piece of literature written by a lady named Beatrix Potter. The Tale of Peter Rabbit is a portrait into the life of a bunny that can't seem to listen to his mother's warnings. Before we get started, to participate fully in our lesson today, you will need 3 sheets of paper, a pencil, and a surface to write on, the student packet for ELA Grade 3 Lesson 11, which can be found at the Tennessee.gov website. Okay, let's begin. Today, our goal is to closely read the classic text with a focus on vocabulary, and specifically on the language used about 120 years ago in England. Since Beatrix Potter wrote this fun story about a disobedient bunny, which means a bunny that will just not behave, this book has become one of the best-selling children's stories of all times. Before we read, good readers identify and understand the purpose of reading. Today, as we closely read about Peter Rabbit, we will take notes on new vocabulary words and main events in our story. Basically, a good reader knows what they will be doing with the text. We will begin our lesson with me showing you what and how to take notes and understand the vocabulary as we read the text. Then there will be time for you to practice on your own with my support. Finally, I will assign you independent work that you can complete after the video ends. Let's start reading. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Let's think together for a moment. Let me check my understanding. I notice the author starts off by introducing a rabbit family. Next, the author tells me where the rabbits live. I see a compound word. A compound word is when 2 or more words are put together to form a new word with a new meaning. When I see the compound word sandbank, I think of the word bank. Now, I know these rabbits don't live in a building with money, and I know it's a place that an animal might live. So the meaning of bank in this text means a place or a mound of dirt or sand. The word in front of bank is sand, so I know the author is using a compound word to explain that bunnies live in a mound of sand underneath the root of a large tree called a fir tree. Let's keep reading. Now, my dears, said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mr. McGregor, or by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out. Let's stop here for a moment. It's important to make sure I understand the meaning of every word. I heard the word mischief. Let me read that sentence again. Peter's mother, Mrs. Rabbit, said, now run along and don't get into mischief. Before I read on, it feels important that we know what the mommy rabbit doesn't want her babies to do. She said, don't get into mischief. That statement makes me think it must be bad because when a mom leaves, she wants her children to behave. Knowing that, I think mischief must mean to not behave. Let's keep reading. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. I'm going to think for a moment. I noticed the author described Peter's sisters and brothers as good. I think the author gave us this hint to show the differences between Peter and the other bunnies. The author, Beatrix Potter, also tells us Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies. Therefore, it seems the mommy rabbit was saying Mischief is the opposite of good or well-behaved bunnies. Mischief means playful misbehavior or troublemaking. Now let's make a connection to another word. Earlier, I used the word mischievous. Do you hear how similar the words sound? Mischief is a noun that means troublemaking. Mischievous is an adjective to describe a person that is into mischief. So I could say, Peter got into mischief or trouble. He is a mischievous bunny. Say mischief. Say mischievous. Take out one sheet of paper and your pencil. Please write a sentence or two using the words mischief and mischievous. My sentences were, Peter was always getting into mischief. Because Peter didn't listen and do what he was told, he was very mischievous. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Let me think about what I just read. After Mrs. Rabbit told Peter not to get into mischief, the author said, but Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. I know that naughty means behave badly. The author said Peter ran straight away. You and I would say Peter ran straight to or directly to the garden. On your note catcher, write a sentence using the word naughty to tell me about Peter. You wrote good sentences. I heard one that said, Peter was a naughty bunny because he was a vegetable thief. Excellent. Let's see if our bunny friend says or does anything else. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Oh no, I don't think Peter wanted to run into Mr. McGregor. This reminds me of a sentence in the story that told us why Peter does not want to run into Mr. McGregor. I'll go back and read the sentence. Mrs. Rabbit said, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. I'm thinking of cause and effect here. The mom tells the baby bunnies that their father was put in a pie because he went in the garden. Thinking through the word pie, I usually think of a peach or apple pie, something sweet. I know in other countries, people do eat more meat pies. Some of those pies use rabbit as the meat. Now, I have made a connection between Mrs. Rabbit's warning not to go in the garden and why Peter didn't want to run into Mr. McGregor. I realized Mr. McGregor had caught Peter's father and used him for a meal. Write a sentence on your note catcher to remind you of the cause and effect to explain what happened to Peter's father and why. Thank you for writing great notes. You would be correct if you said something like, Mr. McGregor baked Peter's father into a pie because he stole the vegetables from the garden. So the cause, Peter's father stole the vegetables from the garden. Because he was caught, Mr. McGregor baked him into a pie. Let's keep reading. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. I'm going to pause and think about what I read. When I read this section about how Peter is terribly frightened when Mr. McGregor chased him, it makes me wonder how Peter forgot how to get back to the gate to escape. As I think about how Peter knew his father had been captured and eaten by Mr. McGregor, and the same man is chasing him, I can imagine Peter's being so afraid that he couldn't think correctly. His memory wasn't working well when he was afraid. In fact, Peter was running so quickly, he lost one shoe around the cabbages and one amongst or around the potatoes. Mr. McGregor called Peter a thief. What was Peter stealing? You know your vegetables. Good job using textual evidence and background knowledge. Yes, Mr. McGregor knew Peter, being a rabbit, wanted to eat the vegetables in his garden. What could this bunny do next? After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Uh-oh, now Peter ran into another problem. Take a moment and add this new problem to your note catcher. I wonder why the author stopped to tell us the blue jacket was new. Let's keep this in mind as we continue reading. This may be an important clue. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. Think with me. You already knew Peter's jacket buttons got caught in the net, and Mr. McGregor is after him. A sparrow is a small bird. Imagine the sparrow rushing to Peter and encouraging him to keep trying to get free and run. I'll pause as you take a few seconds to think back to our text and jot a note to remind you what helped Peter get loose from the net. Going back to reread, I want to make sure I understand all words. I'll read a sentence again. Listen for the word sobs, and using other words and phrases as clues, tell me what sobs means. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. You did it! Sobs means to cry. It really means to cry hard. As you heard, this naughty bunny was lost and frightened and had big tears. This tells me the bunny was not just lightly crying. This bunny was sobbing, crying hard. Write a sentence using the word sobbing on your note catcher, please. Thank you for writing a complete sentence. I heard you say, Peter was sobbing because he was lost, being chased by a large madman, and was about to be hit with a garden tool. There is another word that makes me pause and check my understanding. Listen for the word sieve. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop Peter on the head. This is a word you probably haven't heard before, and the author doesn't give us clues in his sentence other than it's a tool Mr. McGregor had in his garden. This is a tool that separates two materials. You would call this tool a strainer. Your family probably uses one to drain the water off pasta after it's cooked. Let's keep reading. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Kerchoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. Kerchoo sounds like a very funny sneeze, but then again, maybe bunnies sneeze like that. Why did the author tell us Peter sneezed? What happened because Peter sneezed? Yes, bless Peter. What an unfortunate time to sneeze. Sure enough, you're right again. Mr. McGregor heard Peter sneeze while he was hiding, and this told Mr. McGregor where he was hiding, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. Let me think for a moment. As I think back through the paragraph I just read, many things happened. I'm going to take a moment to put my thoughts together. You may want to add notes to your note catcher to help summarize this paragraph. Thank you for adding notes. You probably wrote that Mr. McGregor got tired of chasing and looking for Peter in the tool shed, a small place near a garden to hold tools. The tired gardener went back to work. Peter was damp, slightly wet, and shaking with fright. Good job summarizing. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. One of the parts of the story I enjoyed was how the animals interacted with each other. Think about asking a mouse for directions. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He has heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. I'm thinking back in the story to the sparrows helping Peter and Peter asking the mouse for help. Yet this animal is different. The text said Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He recalled a story from his cousin, Benjamin Bunny. This makes me think the story had an unhappy ending, like Peter's father. Using your background knowledge and the text, why didn't Peter ask the cat for help? Bingo! Cats like to chase bunnies and maybe do more damage. Good thing Peter kept going. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned toward Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Did you hear how the author told us the sound of the hoe, a garden tool, scratching the dirt? This is called onomatopoeia. It's where the author makes the text more interesting by making sounds with words. Repeat after me. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Now that was fun, making the sound of a hoe in the garden dirt. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Do you feel relieved Peter escaped? Whew, I did. Why do you think Mr. McGregor saw Peter and didn't chase him? Jot down a note for yourself. That's what I was thinking. Good answer. I think Mr. McGregor was tired of chasing Peter, and maybe he didn't think Peter was large enough to make a good-sized pie. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice, soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Fortnight means 2 weeks. When I replace the unfamiliar word with the definition, that sentence sounds like this. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in 2 weeks. Replacing the word you don't know with the definition is a great way to check your understanding. Our poor Peter Rabbit. After his troubles, I'll finish our story. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. His brothers and sisters got a treat for dinner. It makes me think Peter might have caused his own early bedtime without a tasty snack. That was a fun and classic piece of children's literature. Please use your second sheet of paper and a pencil to write responses to a few questions. You will also need a surface to write on. I'm going to reread part of the text. Listen carefully. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. Why do you think Peter would go to the garden after his mother told him not to get into mischief? Use the clues from the story. Exactly. Peter liked to eat. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. You are right to say Peter wanted to eat all those fresh vegetables near his home. Our next question, was Peter a thief? And why or why not? I bet some of you said, yes, our bunny was a thief. The vegetables didn't belong to Peter. They belonged to Mr. McGregor, who had worked very hard to grow all the vegetables. The text said our gardener hoed, kind of like raking, and worked to keep the birds from stealing the vegetables away using a scarecrow. I wonder if a bunny would understand that food lying on the ground shouldn't be eaten and it belonged to the man. I'm going to reread some of the text, so please listen carefully. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in the can. How did Peter react to being chased by Mr. McGregor in the garden and then forgetting where to find the gate? I'm sure that you talked about how Peter was frightened. In the text, we see that it was written that he was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. I'm going to reread another part of the text, so listen carefully. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice, soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Do you think Mrs. Rabbit knew Peter had been naughty? That's right. Mrs. Rabbit did know Peter had been naughty. The text stated that she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Excellent. Thank you for using evidence from the text to answer the questions about our story today. Thank you for joining me in the read aloud. You will be completing this part of our lesson after the video ends. You should have another blank sheet of paper for this assignment. Use your notes from today's lesson to help you summarize the tale of Peter Rabbit. Write a summary of the story and be sure to include our vocabulary words, mischief, mischievous, sobs, and sieve. I enjoyed reading the tale of Peter Rabbit and looking closely at some of the vocabulary with you today. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's at-home learning series. Bye.
Jeffrey, let's play a game while we're waiting for our food. Okay, this is a game about our facial expressions that show how our emotions, about how we're feeling. And so I'm going to tell you a sentence, and if you can match your face with that what the sentence is saying, okay?
Okay.
So for instance, how about, my birthday is tomorrow. Is that a good, excited face? Yeah, it shows that you're so super excited, right? Okay, so now I'm gonna put this menu up so I can't see your face, and I'm gonna say another sentence, and can you match it? I am so sad that my grandpa is leaving tomorrow. Tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready.
What kind of face is that?
Sad.
Sad face? Like this?
Yes.
When your lips go down, right? It shows that we're really sad. Yeah, this emotion is sad. Okay, so you ready to do one for me?
Yes.
Okay, you make up a sentence and then tell me to match the feeling to my face.
I wish I could go to the beach, but my mom says I can't.
What kind of emotion is my face saying?
I'm sad.
Sad. Yes. Thank you for playing this game with me. I really liked how you used your sentences so that I could make my face show how I'm feeling.